Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning into The Positive Perspective. I'm your host, Kirsten Turner, and today I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Jeff Karp, a Harvard and MIT professor, biomedical innovator, and best-selling author of LIT, Life Ignition Tools. From overcoming childhood ADHD to holding over 100 patents and co-founding 14 companies that have raised over $650 million. Dr. Karp has transformed challenges into catalysts for creativity and leadership. He's also the executive president of Geoversity Nature's University in Panama, where he integrates science, design, and indigenous wisdom to foster a thriving future. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, so good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So happy to have you here. Just to get started, I would love to hear more about your journey from where you started to what has brought you to doing the things that you're doing today and what you are doing today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I feel like we go back to the beginning. I was, pretty geeky kid and, maybe like lost in many ways because I just felt like the system, the education system just really made me feel stupid, really, like made me feel like I didn't belong, that like there was something wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
And that started kind of presenting in the second grade, and the teacher wanted to hold me back to repeat the second grade because I just wasn't, nothing was landing, nothing, I wasn't getting anything. And my parents, my mom tried like flashcards and phonics and all kinds of
All the
things,
things.
all the things that were available at the time, creatively, but nothing really worked. And so yeah, that's kind of where I began, was kind of butting heads with the system, and really trying to find my place, trying to figure out who I was, trying to figure out why was I so different from everybody else. And in between the second and third grade, I had this transformational experience happen when, because my parents negotiated if I spend the summer catching up with tutors, I could go on to the third grade so I wouldn't have to repeat the second grade. And I went in one day and the tutor asked me a series of, like, kind of read some passages and asked me questions. And I gave answers just quickly as I normally did, not really knowing whether my answers were right or not. And then the tutor on this day looked me in the eye, and asked me after I responded with an answer, how did you think about that? And
Interesting.
that question sort of expanded my mind because it allowed me to think about thinking. Like there was an actual shift that occurred, a pretty seismic shift actually in my thinking, because I went from just being super impulsive, and I continued to be impulsive, saying what was ever on my mind, just doing whatever I kind of felt like doing, and just sort of seeing people's reactions around me, to being able to, I would say things and then I'd be like, wait a moment, maybe I could have changed what I said, or maybe I can observe other people around me and see what are they doing, what are they saying when they're asked certain things, or how are they behaving in certain settings, and maybe I could mimic them. And so I started actually mimicking, almost like a chameleon. I was like mimicking my environment and then feeling into how that worked or didn't work for me.
Oh,
Um,
fascinating.
and that was kind of been my whole life, really. It's just sort of observing and then processing, trying it on, realizing most things that other people do just don't work for me, and that I need to find my own processes.
Okay, I love this so much because there's a couple things there, right? One is it's the first, like, finding your authentic self, right? And that's sort
Mm,
of that journey, and then accepting what actually who you are and what works for you. And then the other piece is this, um, it's like an awareness too, right? It's this
mhm.
awareness and figuring it out, and it's also such a gift for you to find that at a younger age. I feel like that experience doesn't happen for many of us until we're, like, much later in years, so it's truly kind of a gift for you to be able to do that.
Yeah.
The other thing is it's almost like, a scientist, and I always think that people who look at life in terms of a scientist, like, "Let me try this, let me try that, this doesn't work, that's not for me," is such an empowering way to go through and move through life.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a couple analogies that I really like. Like one is like the movie analogy, right? Like your life is a movie and you're the director, and right? Like you can actually choose who the other cast members are and characters, and you can choose, you have a lot of choice in terms of how you respond to things, and that whole thing. But then also I really like the way that you framed it, which is everybody, you imagine you wake up every day and you sort of say, okay, my life is a living laboratory. And I'm going to conduct experiments to figure out what I like, what I don't like, the people that really I have resonance with, and, how do I sort of make decisions, and then maybe they end up not being the best decisions in the sense of they don't take you towards your goal, they take you away from it or backwards, but then you gain insights that then help you with the next experiment. And so, because a scientist is never like does one experiment and that's it. I mean, they do like millions of experiments over the course of their career, and it's all about sort of evolving and iterating and learning and gaining insights. And so when you shift sort of the focus from the outcome to gaining an insight, it becomes very empowering, and you become less emotionally tied to the result because you're now focused more on just like, I learned something, the next time at it, I'm going to, and most experiments that we perform don't kill us. Right.
Right.
So I would say that, it's actually implied. I think about that a lot, right? Like it's sort of like, it may cause distress. It may cause you to become vulnerable and have these significant emotional pendulum swings where you feel like, your whole life you feel like you're not going to survive, but most of the time you actually do survive. And I think that's the key point in all of this as well, is that then that means that you can run more experiments and you can gain more insights. And, there's so many stories of people who, lost everything, but then they gained so many insights in the process, and it took time, but with the right support, the right network, they were able to kind of rebuild and be much more intentional sort of in the next version.
Yeah, it's an outlook on life that I think builds resilience. And it's this overcoming of like not being afraid to fail, not being afraid to make mistakes, and just like an understanding that that is part of the process. And it seems obvious as we have this conversation, but for so many of us, it's what stops us from trying different things, from getting involved, from taking a risk, from, any of those kinds of things. How
Yeah.
would you say that mindset, because that started playing out for you very early? How
Yeah.
do you think
Yeah.
that that has impacted the trajectory of where you've gone and the things that you've done?
Well, I would first say just to respond to one of the things that you just said, like I'd say most of the time I am fearful of things not working out. So it's not like it, I feel like that can also be immobilizing, right? Like if we set the bar so high to say like that we're not going to be afraid to fail, because I don't know, I feel like, I mean, that seems like the ultimate place to be, right? Like to not be afraid. But in some ways, I feel like, for our survival, like that fear is kind of built in because then it hyperactivates our brain. Like it actually, we can use it, for good. But I'm just thinking like a lot of the time I am afraid of failing. And, but it's sort of like, what are the little tricks and tools that I that can shift my mind away from that. Right. So that it's like, okay, I recognize that's there. If I sit with this, I'm not going to do it. But one of the things actually, I don't know if you know Chase Jarvis, but he just came out with a book, and it's what he and I was on his podcast last year, and one of the things that he said actually I thought was really amazing, which he said is like most of the time, not sort of stepping through fear leaves you in a worst case scenario,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so it's like when you sort of think about it, from that perspective, you start to realize that when you step through the fear, yes, you might fail, but then you might gain an insight. You're probably going to gain an insight, might not come right away, but, might take a little bit of time, but then that will help you navigate your future path. But had you not taken that step and sort of tried to step through the fear, then you're not going to gain the insight, and so you're going to hit more of a plateau in your life. And we know that that is a kind of a more unfulfilling place to be in your life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, that's amazing. So you describe ADHD as a superpower that sort of fueled your creativity. So I have a lot of people who listen and who I work with and who I talk to are high achievers, really ambitious people. And so I guess my question for you is that a lot of the time we can see those things or our quirks as a weakness. And how do you or how have you sort of reframed these traits to become more of an asset?
Yeah, I think one of the ways is that, and I kind of saw this like, early on as I was navigating the education system, that it's kind of like society or these societal constructs or like organizational constructs like the education system they kind of frame things in a very particular way that define, success is, you get like straight A's and you perform like this and, the teachers like you and, like all that, you get along well with other, like everybody or, whatever it is, like there's some sort of like framing. And what I started to realize is that that framing like it seems as though when you're younger and maybe even when you're older too, but like that framing is defining really something in stone about reality, right? And what I started to realize as I was navigating is that there's almost like multiple realities. Like everybody has their own version of reality, and it's sort of like what other people impose on you might fit you, but often doesn't fit who you are and how your brain works and how you sort of show up in the world and experience the world. And so I kind of found that, so for example, with ADHD, it's like the way the education system is run right now, if you have ADHD or let's say severe ADHD, then it's considered a disability, but it's just like everything's relational. So it's a disability in relation to the construct of the education system, how it currently operates,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But if you, let's say, go back in time to when we were all like hunters and gatherers, and you could imagine, and I've been sort of researching into this, and there's belief that like people who were neurodiverse and, likely saw patterns in nature that others didn't see, in the tribe. And so the people who are neurodiverse likely helped keep the tribe alive by
Yeah, of course.
noticing patterns and being able to tune into things that others didn't tune into, right? And so I think, and in that case, it's not a disability, it's a superpower, right?
Yeah,
So I
exactly.
think the way we define a disability or a superpower really depends on sort of the construct, like what are we relating, like what kind of construct are we relating it to? And so for me, I started to realize like it was almost like, let's say I have to, like just a kind of a thought experiment. Let's say the goal is I get in a boat and I'm trying to get down to the end of the river. Like that's the goal, right? So I would describe my path is like I will just bump into every single rock along the way, every branch, and I won't just bump into it. Like I'll look overboard and I'll like examine it and I'll think about it and I'll be like, oh my God, why did I bump into it? And I'll sort of see the
Yes.
shape and write all these
Yeah.
things. And then maybe there'll be some sort of path that I see over here and I stop and I get out of the boat and then I realize I'm walking and I'm exploring and then I'm realizing, wait, the goal is to get to the end of the river. So I go get back in the boat and I get to the end. And it's like by the time I got to the finish line, yes, it's taken me like 5 times longer than most people. But at the same time, I've had a very different experience, a very rich experience, right? Like I've stopped along the way and sort of noticed and used my powers of observation.
Which is beautiful. But the other thing I was thinking as you were talking is like, or what you realize is that destination is somebody else's destination and not
Yeah.
actually yours. And yours is completely somewhere else. And it's
Yeah.
fun
Yeah.
to hear how you look at things and how you talk about it. So it reminds me of one of the executives that I worked with as a client. And he talked about, he's sort of like, I've reached all of these things. I have all of the what I'm supposed to have. And he's like, and it just doesn't feel like what it's supposed to feel like, what it should feel like. And he talked about it in terms of not being successful, but feeling success filled.
Yeah.
And I
That's
love that because I'm like, it's a
yeah. Yeah.
very different way of looking at it. And it's like
Well, I
the
like that.
definition that we are handed is it's a version of what somebody, like you talk about constructs, has built for us to be, this is what success is, this is what you want to achieve and what you want to reach for. And sort of I had a similar journey. I wish I had mine between grade 2 and grade 3. I wish I found out earlier. Mine was more in the once I was like fully going in my HR career. And then I sort of realized, okay, is this the path that I want? And then I sort of did the like looking over the boat, if we were to follow your
Yeah.
analogy, and looking in the water and being like, is that what I want? And then looking at the different branches and deciding, what is that success filled version look like for
Yeah.
me? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even if we, for example, let's say we look at nature and we say, well, how would we define success and failure in nature, right? And you could say, well, a certain species or whatever becomes extinct, and it's like, okay, maybe that's a failure, but like the dinosaurs were on the earth for something like 65, 75 million years, and they're extinct. And so would we consider them a failure? Like, I don't know, right? Like,
Right.
personally, I don't think I would. And then the question is, well, maybe there's no failure in nature. Maybe there is no success in nature. It's like, there's some statistics, something like 99% of the species that ever existed on the planet are extinct, So there's like this constant renewal that's happening. And
Right.
maybe that's really the ultimate, right? Is to kind of frame things in terms of the evolution, the adaptation, the renewal, the right. And it's just
Yes.
that constant, because defining success and failure is just, to me, it's so limited, right? Like it's so linear. It's like the end, right? It's like,
Yeah.
okay, you just stop,
Yep.
but nothing ever really, like, after, for example, like someone wins a gold medal in the Olympics, it's not like then their life is over.
They're
You know what I
done.
mean?
Yeah.
Right? Their career is over. Like, it's like they have a whole life ahead of them. So it's kind of like, I think we just need to be careful about defining goals as being so finite, right? And how can we switch from like more of from a contracted way of thinking to more expansive way of thinking?
Absolutely. It's what ruins the journey for us,
Yeah,
right? We're
yeah, for
constantly
sure.
trying to achieve, trying to get to the next thing. And then when you get it, well, of course, there's something else because we're humans and we're meant to grow and we're meant to
Hmm.
want more and to develop and figure things out and continue to go. We don't just end. So it creates this perpetual thing like we're chasing something and that we can't. And it ruins the experience, life
It
experience,
does.
right?
It does. It gets in the way, I think. And I feel like sometimes it's even similar to, let's say, if we think of like meditation, for example, right? We might think, okay, we're going to meditate 20 minutes a day, and then you kind of fit it into your day, but then you go through your day and you're like super reactive about everything that's happening, versus to say, wait, can I make my whole day meditative? Can I find moments throughout my day, not where I take 20 minutes to, like, drop in? And that could be really helpful for a lot of people. And it's been helpful for me in the past to do that. But what I found to be even more helpful is to say, can I, when I walk by a window and I see a tree, is there a way that I can just pause and connect momentarily with that tree? Like, just
Present
to
moment.
yeah, like
Yeah.
just to kind of drop in and to appreciate the beauty or some nuance about it, or to have a thought that's like, some curiosity about the pattern of the bark, or to look out my window here and see, the trees are starting to bud, and that, wow, it's like, all this potential energy that's right, like, just to kind of do that throughout the day. And that's what I think. So instead of having this, because we just search for these like ways to put things in boxes, versus I have been trying to practice in my life just being more expansive in everything. And I have all sorts of tools and things I'm practicing now. So, like, to kind of move away whenever I feel contraction, to sort of turn it into expansion. And I think if you just are meditating 20 minutes a day, it's going to be hard to then incorporate that throughout your day. But if you can find moments throughout your day to just drop into a meditative state, even for 5 seconds, where you're just looking at a tree and admiring something, then I think you'll be more able to achieve what you want to achieve, which is, creating the space between reaction and response, and,
Yes.
kind of calm sort of state.
So amazing. So, I have to ask now, what tools do you use? What practices have you found to be the most effective for you? And I'll frame it too just by saying, like, I know a lot of the people who are listening, sometimes they work corporate jobs and they're entrepreneurs or they're CEOs, and you think that they have control over their calendar to like step away and do things, but there's a lot of self-talk, I think, that goes in there that's like, I have to be the one that's like first in the door. I have to show and lead that, it's hard work to get things going. So I'm the first one there, I'm the last one out, and they don't take the breaks they need and they get pulled from one meeting to another. And then same sort of with entrepreneurs, it's on them to deliver results for their customers, to deliver. How did they find that space to that they need, that we all need?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of possibilities in what you just said. I mean, one is to sort of step back and sort of assess, like, what are the assumptions that are being made, and are they truly valid, right? So this idea that, if you're leading an organization, that you need to be the first one in, the last one that leaves, versus maybe you need to be the one who just is present and listens to others, and who actually sets the tone for maximizing value creation. I don't know, my experience, I'm able to create a lot more value for the organizations I'm involved in by taking breaks and letting my brain sync up, right? Like if I have a meeting, let's say I have like a half hour meeting, whatever, and then I have like an hour meeting after and I go right into that meeting, I'm not going to actually take enough time to process what I just heard. Like there's likely a few key insights that I just heard, and I'm likely going to then forget about them because I've just gone into the next meeting. But if I take like 5 or 10 minutes just to close my eyes or go for a walk, or not do anything sort of too active, and just let my mind swirl around, that's where I start to do lateral thinking. That's where I start to connect dots in my mind. So I sort of think of it like that. Like there's like a matrix, like we all have these matrices in our mind, and there's lots of dots. And when we meet with somebody, they're giving us sort of populating the dots, but allowing us to connect dots together. And
Mm-hmm.
so, our brain needs to be in a state where we're not taking information in order to connect the dots. And when we start connecting the dots, we start saying like, oh, that person that I just met with, they had some ideas. Wait, somebody I met like 3 months ago or a year ago had something similar to say, let's all get together. But you wouldn't think to do that. And then when you get together, then the magic happens. And that's, to me, that's the kind of leader that I want to show up as, is like the one that's going to constantly be innovating in the maximal way possible. And you can't do that unless you pause and take time to let things swirl around in your mind.
Absolutely. The space allows for creativity,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we don't have, like, we lose that, right? Like I remember going, like I'd go from one meeting to another. And in business, I never thought of myself as a creative person because I thought creative arts, business is a different, it's strategic, it's different. So I never even thought of business in that sense.
Yeah.
And it's such an important and critical piece of all kinds of different things. But it is true. I think we lose even the present moment, or being able to be fully there in our next meeting or in our next conversation or interaction because of that. And then you take that home, and it doesn't just impact you in the office, it impacts you in your personal life, and it just rolls from one day to the next. At least this is what
Yeah.
I see a lot of. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think the other part of it too is that we tend to just repeat what we experience. So if we go into, let's say, an organization, and like, I'm a researcher, I've trained in a lot of labs, and then when I leave that whatever lab I'm in, I feel like I try to just repeat what I learned. And then that sticks with me for a long period of time, unless I sort of intercept it and start to ask myself, okay, and a lot of it can be the work ethic as well, right? Like it's like, okay, this environment is one where there's a high focus on productivity, but I feel like a lot of organizations sort of, it seems as though the sentiment like in the room is that you want to focus on productivity, but really from an organizational perspective, you want to contribute value, right? And the
Yes.
two don't always line up. In fact, a lot of the time focusing on productivity, you miss the high value opportunities. And those come from, as you were saying, like pausing to connect dots to then creatively pull disparate pieces of information together. And that's where the amazing ideas happen. And the other place I think amazing ideas happen is when you encounter failure, and then you tend to have this emotional pendulum swing, and then it starts to come back after a few good nights sleep. And then that's when I find we have our greatest receptivity for new insights, right?
Mhm.
Like it's hard to be receptive to new insights unless you've experienced something like failure or some sort of like setback or some challenge, So like there's all those kinds of things. But I think, yeah, I think there's a lot that we can do to keep ourselves more expansive. I think that I don't know. One of the ways I sort of look at all of this is that it's like an algorithm, right? Like when you're in a company or a lab or whatever it is in the education system, there's a way that people learn to do things, and it's like one of maybe infinite possibilities. But we tend to, we see somebody ahead of us has been successful, and then we just continue to repeat that algorithm over and over again. And I find that those algorithms are often like very situation dependent, and often aren't focused on the moving the needle maximally for yourself personally and then professionally. And that's what the book I wrote actually lit. Life Ignition Tools is really all about, is like intercepting patterns, and how can you, well, first of all, kind of becoming aware that you're actually repeating patterns that other people sort of presented to you in various environments, and then how do you intercept it to find patterns that truly work for you and like can help you maximize innovation and connection with other people and deepen your everyday experiences.
Yeah. And I've heard too, you just reminded me is that, and the reason why habits and patterns in this can start is also part of it is that time and environment have memory.
Yeah.
So your space creates memories of, and so what happens is you start to repeat the same things over and over again. It's why some people on a birthday or at Christmas may get extra triggered. Something may not happen, but if it did happen in their past, those emotions can come back and affect them again. And so they repeat the same patterns. And so it is an interesting space. And obviously, we go to our home and we go to work and we're doing the same thing every day. So our mind, naturally, if we're on autopilot, will think and do the exact same things, which is why you hear some people talk about, well, brush your teeth with a different hand. I don't know if that will do it. I haven't tried that
Yeah,
myself,
no, it
but it
works actually. It does work. Yeah,
it
yeah. And
interrupts the pattern. Yeah.
yeah, and it's, to me, it's not just doing it once, it's actually being consistent with it, because what happens is if you do it once, you kind of feel a little strange, and it doesn't work that well. But if you stick with it for 4, 5, 6, 7 days, what you want to tap into is how it starts to get better, right? And
Right.
how, not that you can just change something and try it and be like, oh, that doesn't feel good, but to actually be the observer of neuroplasticity, like in action. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And so like I think that's kind of what we want. That's sort of, to me, that's the goal of that type of experiment, is that we want to change something, but then we also want to experience how that change, we want to sort of drop into how is that change impacting our mind and our skills, and how are we responding to it and changing and adapting, and sort of experience that adaptation in real time is very empowering, because when you do that, then you start to be like, okay, what else could I change? And you start thinking of even bigger things to change, and you're willing to take like bigger risks. And that's where sort of the greatest insights, the greatest opportunities lie, is when the bigger the risk you're able to sort of take, the more fear you're able to step through.
Which is what we would need to do in order for growth and to experience new things.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Dr. Joe Dispenza
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah,
and
yeah.
his work?
Yeah.
So what we're talking about too is like also people get bored, right? And so they wake up and it's the same thing that they're repeating every single day. And so these things, these pattern interrupts really help shift things and make a difference,
Yeah.
so that we're not doing the same things every day and we're able to step into those things. It's an awareness, right? It's bringing this awareness to our behavior and our patterns, and that we're actually in control if we watch ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, the thing is that I kind of find sometimes that there's all these things are sort of presented as, good things, right? Like, oh, we need to have more awareness in our lives, or we need to connect more deeply, or, we need to do this or that and this or that. But I find one of the challenges in these types of things is that it's not associated with a process. And I find I need a process. Like, if the goal is to develop more awareness, I need a process to get there, because it sounds great, but then I start shaming myself because I'm like, wow, awareness is so great, but I don't actually know how to get there. And everybody else seems to be getting there, but I'm not getting there. So why am I
Mm-hmm.
not getting there? And so I think that what happens is that when you change something in your routine, you're actually setting yourself up for awareness, right? So it's sort of like awareness often is sort of projected as the first step, but I would argue actually it's not the first step. You actually need to change something first to then refocus your brain. And when your brain moves away from the routines or the habits that it's constantly in the loop of and shifts to something else, that's when you actually have awareness, right? So it's like it's changing something up in your day actually is the path to awareness.
Amazing. And so for you, what were some of those tools that you have found have made the biggest impact for you?
Yeah, I think well, there's been a lot of tools. I mean, I certainly could go through some of the tools from the book. There's 12 tools there, but there's also, it's an evolving tool set as well. And I continually am experimenting and tinkering. And, one of the things that I've been practicing recently is when my mind starts to contract. And what I mean by that is starts to loop, starts to kind of, things start to kind of cave in, or I feel trapped, or I start to sort of fall into this negative place, like something didn't go well. I didn't have the reaction I wanted to have, and now I'm worried about a relationship, or maybe, the result wasn't what I was expecting, or something's taking more time than I thought it should. And now I'm focused on like, that, and I'm just
Yeah.
looping. What I do is, I have a few things that I kind of practice now, and one is to almost see that. So it's almost like what I do is I think about breathing in the contraction and then breathing out expansion. I don't know, just for me, it's
Yeah.
somehow it kind of works, right?
Yeah.
And so like I'll just kind of close my eyes and I'll think about, okay, my brain is contracting here in this moment. I don't want to be here, right? Like this is not good. This doesn't
Yes.
feel good. This isn't helpful, right? This is not helpful for me at all to just be in this, right? And I mean, it can be helpful to sit with a lot of things, but if you're sort of sinking and you're really in this negative place and you can't sort of be curious, then I would say, you want to get to a place where you can kind of sit with something, but I'll be curious about it, So it may not feel great, but you're curious. But a lot of the time I'm not curious in that moment, right?
Right.
And so it's like, okay, how do I get to that stage? So what I'll do is I'll think about just like, okay, there's something, I don't know where, but there's something that is causing my brain to just shrink and become linear and finite and just feel like it's closing in on itself. And I just sort of visualize that in some way, and just that I'm breathing that in, and then I'm just breathing out expansion. Like I'm just taking whatever that contraction is and I'm just sort of expanding it. And I just do that for like 5 breaths or 10 breaths. I mean, it doesn't take that long. And I start to feel better, like as I'm sort of and again, it's like the contractions in, the expansions out, almost like I'm digesting somehow, or regenerating or renewing that contraction into expansion. Like I'm just, my body, my mind, everything is sort of doing that. And when I do that, I start to feel better. And then that opens myself up to be more curious, or to be able to change my mindset, because I think mindset ends up being something that can really help us. It can be linked, like we have these contracted mindsets and then we have these expansive mindsets. And when you
Varying degrees for different
varying
people.
degrees, right? Yeah, for sure. But when you can kind of recognize you're in a contracted mindset and have a path to switch it to an expansive mindset, it's super liberating. It sort of allows me to then, like, going through my day, and then all of a sudden I'm like immobilized, and then I have this tool and I breathe in the contraction, I breathe out the expansion, and then I can continue with my day and I'm not like immobilized anymore. And so I don't know, I just find that to be really helpful.
Do you want to know what's really fun about what you have said is that you have found your version. So I know if we want to change our mindset, or if we want to change how we're feeling, it's called the triad. So, and it's 3 things that you can do that are going to shift you out of it. And you, in that practice that you've created, are doing 2 of them. And I don't think you even know that you're doing this, how this is set up. But you can change your physiology, your focus, and your language. And so in what you're doing, you're changing your physiology by shifting your breath and calming your nervous system, right?
Yeah.
And then your focus by visualizing and how you're bringing things in, how you're moving things out. You're doing 2 of them. And that's part of the reason probably why it's working so well for you. And then I just can't help, it's incredible what you've just on your own, or just like, this is what works for me, is amazing. I have heard you talk about curiosity a couple times here, and when we talked previously, we touched on it too. And I think it is such a crucial part of life and mindset and how we look at things and how we experience it. And so I'm just curious to hear you talk a little bit about curiosity and how that has played a role for you and everything that you've done and built.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, well, first of all, yeah, thank you for telling me about the triad thing. That's really cool. Yeah, I had no idea, but it makes sense. Uh, and what was the third thing? The one thing that, because I'm curious, what was the third thing that it,
Language.
oh, language. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
language in this terms of how you think, like what you're thinking,
Yeah.
which comes down to when what you're thinking is what you're focusing on and then what meaning you give it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And so how you decide to think about something. And it's fascinating the meanings we attach to things and we don't even realize that that meaning could be completely wrong. And unless we shift that, we can feel like crap, right? And we don't even realize that it's not even true. But that's a whole other that'll be a
Yeah.
whole
Yeah.
other
Yeah. Yeah.
podcast for you and I. We
For
can
sure. Yeah. Yeah. The next one. The next one. Okay. Which I'm totally up for.
yeah, yay.
But curiosity. So yeah, I feel like so curiosity to me is it's just like it's life force energy, like it's something where, every child is born curious and, just look at how they interact with the world, right? And how they can just grab pots and pans and they're just fascinated by everything, right? And then I think, and then what happens is over time, with the education system and, other sort of societal constructs is that we start to lose our, we stop cultivating our curiosity. We stop sort of putting the emphasis on curiosity being important for our health actually and for our livelihood and our well-being and for our just like as a way of being to actively engage it. And I think it just kind of an example if you sort of think about like hundreds or let's say thousands of years ago when there were no schools, right, and people were kind of outside and observing and you're maybe there's a lot of kind of apprentice type of things and a lot of things changing and moving and you're like watching and listening and all your senses are like fully activated to then putting people into these buildings like schools where there's like the walls aren't changing, the ceiling's not changing, the floor's not changing, right? Like there's
Yeah,
and it's like the only thing that's changing is the person who's standing up at the front who's working. It's like the children are just watching someone work, right? And
right.
kind of taking notes. And I think that going from these lived experiential sort of deep experiences to one where you're observing something fairly linear, right, sort of happening, I think has actually turned off or dimmed our curiosity and our creativity that kind of comes out of that. And so to me, it's really important that everybody as individuals that we have a strategy for resensitizing our aliveness and tapping into that curiosity life force. And it's so simple to do it. And it's like when you just spend a few moments a day, it just opens up and, gets the ball rolling down the hill. Like, for example, I don't know if can you see this here? I have a pine cone on my
Yeah.
desk, right?
Yes.
So,
Yeah. It's
so,
random.
so I keep it there because, I just will look over it at it once in a while. I picked it up off the street. And so then, I'm sort of connected to it, right? Because I
So
brought
this
it
is a
in.
good reminder.
Yeah. I mean, so there's all these things, right? So you could look at it and then just put it down, but like you could really look at it, right? And start to notice like the difference in sort of like the colors and the shapes and the different parts of it. And like when you put it in water, it actually closes up and then you take it out and it opens, like there's all these things that you can really will sort of stoke your curiosity. Or like, let's say if I walk around my neighborhood and I look at the pattern of the bark in the trees, right? And I start to notice that, it almost looks like an ocean, right? Like it looks like there's currents and there's all these things. And then I look and I see birds and the birds are latching on to the crevices. And I'm like, oh, so the bark, the birds are kind of, if it was smooth, maybe the birds couldn't like walk on it. And you know what I mean? Like all these,
I
so
just love it.
you start
Yes.
thinking about these things and then that turns into, and then like now again I was saying like I look outside and I see these buds and they're about to bloom and I'm thinking about all that potential energy, and during the winter it was all sort of conserved and like, right, like all these patterns and these ecosystems. So it's sort of and then it's like when you start just sort of thinking about these things just a little bit here and there, it opens up a whole universe of possibilities to keep going. And to me, the ultimate is like when you can look out your window in your backyard or wherever you are and experience awe and wonder and be curious and have questions come in your mind. And when we cultivate that individually, it raises our baseline sort of fulfillment in life, because
Yeah.
now we're not expecting to get that from another person per se, right? We can get it from our environment around us, right? And I think to me, that's also maybe one of the challenges in a lot of relationships, is that we sort of are trying to get everything from one person or a subset of people, but like when you can actually look out your window or we'll go for a walk and connect with things around you and sort of stoke your curiosity, you start to be less reliant on those things coming from your relationships.
I think you may have just answered one of the earlier questions about how to, a corporate and entrepreneur when I mean, if you're sitting at your desk and you've got like, look at the things. How did they get there? It's almost like zooming out, right? Because it's so easy to get sucked into what's going on in our day to day and who needs this from me and what else do I have to do and the to-do list, right? But when you're
Mm-hmm.
able to just take that moment of what you're doing, and it's also a way of practicing gratitude. Like, when you kind of
Mm-hmm.
say that moment that you have, yeah, I think that might be a tip for people who are doing, because it is a beautiful way of zooming out
Yeah.
and not feeling so sucked into the day to day, and to see the sort of the abundance and the amazing things that are here that we often just don't even see.
We don't. Yeah. And I think, one of the things I like to think about, like there's all these mindsets that I'm constantly kind of, I don't know, evolving and thinking about. And one of the mindsets I kind of keep coming back to is, it's really about how, and now I'm going to be like losing the thought, but I'm going to try to hold on. I'm going to grab it.
It'll come back.
Hold
It'll come
on.
back.
No,
No.
but it's just the sense that actually I got it again, is like how, um, everything in nature is nature working, right? Like everything is working for everything else, right? Like it's sort of like the trees are providing a home for the birds, and the birds are, they're what are the birds doing? I mean, the birds are doing amazing. I mean, they're like pollinating, and they're moving things
Dropping
around and
seeds and
dropping seeds, and right, all these things. And then there's like, the squirrels are moving like nuts around, and they're digging, and they're leaving them in various places, and the bees are, like it's sort of like everything is working for everything else,
yeah.
right? Like everything is working. And then when we sort of look at like humans, I think we tend to think of like ourselves, like humans are working for humans, and we're extracting from the earth, right? We're like taking from nature. So it's like, but everything else in the natural world is working for, like whether it's food for something else, or whether it's something dies and then it regenerates and it creates flowers and new trees, and you know what I mean? Like, so to me, in nature, we are nature, like everything's nature. And so it's sort of like when we start to think about we are nature working, and we're part of this. I mean, interconnectedness doesn't even do it justice, because
Right.
it's just, interconnected assumes that there's like gaps in between, but like, you know what I mean? Like everything is like, this oneness of the world, and all the ecosystems that are working together. I don't know. I just feel like when you start to think about that, you start to appreciate, and you mentioned gratitude, you start to then take better care of everything. You start taking
Yeah.
better care of yourself and each other and all your belongings, and everything, that kind of came from the earth. And I don't know, to me, it's just like a mindset that's just been really helpful for me to get out of this human centric mindset that dominates most of us, this human supremacy, this, like as you sort of said, like, you go into work and it's just all human based stuff, right? Like, oh, I need to get
We're
this done, and this
disconnected.
and that, and this and that. And I know, we need a way of plugging into the system and working so that we can support our families, and, and things like that. But at the same time, if we get too narrow in that and we don't step back, as you kind of were saying, and sort of see ourselves as we're nature working, like nature loves nature, like, and just watch like birds playing together or squirrels, like they're always playing, right? They're
Have you
always
read The
like,
Power of Now by
right?
Eckhart Tolle?
I haven't, no.
He literally talks about that. He talks about sitting on a bench watching the ducks in the water, and then he offers these takeaways from just watching them. I wish I could remember them. I can't. But it's just such a beautiful analogy of what it looks like to just slow down, and when you're walking to actually realize, like, how are you breathing? Can you feel your feet? Can you, and it's a whole mindset piece, right? When you're out there, are you actually paying attention to what's around you, or are you gone? Like, are you in your head, in your thoughts totally, or are you able to stay present and grateful for the experience that's right happening to you in that moment?
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, the other thing that I think we tend to see these like tend to see the gaps as being like these massive gaps that are just so, they're just too big. We'll never cross them, like in the sense of like, oh, I don't feel connected to nature. It's going to take me years to practice and I just don't have the time. And like, how am I ever going to do it?
I
But
don't
the
have the time.
reality is, right? Like the reality is that if you can connect with nature for 1 second, then you can connect with nature for 2 seconds, right? And then you can do it for 3 seconds. And so
Yeah.
it's sort of like all you need to do is find a way to like look out your window or go for a walk and just look at something. And it could be anything. Like something might not immediately be curious to you, but like something else might be, right? So looking at the tops of the trees, or you see the trees like swaying and you're like, okay, well, why is it not snapping? Like how, like nature's engineered the trunk and the design of the tree so it can really sway in the wind. And so there's been a response, right, to
I
get there.
love how you think about curiosity, and how so much of that ties to nature for you, and how much that actually has to offer. And I think a lot of people don't look at it that way. And I haven't. I mean, there's so much there to be curious about. I have found that curiosity has offered so many other things to me about connecting with people. So it's one thing to connect with nature, but even to connect with people. And I've seen it even with my daughters, where there'll be a reaction, and instead of, like, they'll do something, and instead of me reacting to them, I instead will harness curiosity, and to figure out why they're doing that. And it is amazing what you can learn. And so for me, we're programmed with things. And I think of that saying that we were given, curiosity killed the cat. And I think of that and I'm just like, what a horrible
I know,
thing
right?
to program into people, because
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
looking at it and I'm like, in my coaching, it's
true.
massive. With my relationships and my kids, it's been a turning point. I've learned so much about
Mm.
them and their experiences and how the human mind works, just literally from becoming, like, getting more curious. So
Yeah.
it's just, yeah.
Yeah, actually, something to say about that is because again, it's sort of like, okay, well, what's the process to activate that? And something that I've been practicing is actually setting an intention for curiosity. And that actually, it changes everything for me. Like, for example, like if let's say I'm going to have a conversation with my sister, right? Or she just calls me out of the blue, right? She calls me. Then sometimes I find I'm just talk about myself, right? And or like a friend of mine, my friend Mike, who's in Amsterdam, calls me or whatever, or I call him, but I don't set the intention, then I just end up like, seeking his advice. And I don't think, and then, but if ahead of time I set an intention for curiosity, right? I'm like, okay, my goal here is to
Yeah.
be curious. And it like literally takes like a microsecond to think about that intention, And then I go into the call and then I find there's a shift that's occurred, and now I'm open, I'm more receptive. I'm asking more questions, I'm listening more carefully to what they're saying, I'm tuning into the cues that they're sending me about maybe they're in a sensitive moment or maybe there's something behind what they're saying. And so I start to ask more questions and I try to be, you know what I mean? So it's sort of like I find setting an intention for curiosity is very helpful for me, especially because I tend to just speak about all sorts of random things and, and about myself. And so I found that setting the intention actually can shift from ego to curiosity. And It's
That
like so simple.
it is. I've found, and I'm like, I'll go on a whole tangent, so I'm gonna try and keep it short. But when it comes to setting intentions, I find that that literally changed how I structure my days, how I show up, how I go to the gym, how I show up for my clients, how I show up like as a mom, like in every area, I set an intention for who I want to
Mm,
be and how I want to show up, and it's crazy. But on that note of intentions, I have questions that I want to make sure I ask
for
you.
sure.
I do. Um, I wanted to ask you about so many high achievers struggle with burnout or the never enough feeling, right? And so I was just curious what daily practices or thought patterns have helped you stay grounded while still aiming big because you've been involved in co-founding a number of different companies. I'm even curious how you managed to do all of that and build that and sort of what's kept you going and yeah.
Yeah, I think, well, I think certain things about recognizing, I mean, kind of maybe along the lines of curiosity, kind of keeping on that topic, being curious about how my mind and body are responding to the day-to-day sort of interactions with other people and the setbacks, let's say, that I'm encountering, right? Like kind of what we were saying before, like about when I encounter a setback, I notice like there is a rhythm, right? And actually I started getting in touch with rhythms a lot when I started traveling overseas. And I recognized that I wouldn't sleep really well on the flight, and I'd get there like, or a lot of these Europe flights are red eyes, and then from Boston, and I get there, and then I'd have meetings, in the afternoon, and I wouldn't have slept, and then I noticed like I'm super tired, like oh my god, how am I going to function? I'm crazy tired, and then even if I don't have coffee, like an hour or two later, I'm super awake. And I'm like, whoa, like what just happened? Like, how did that work? And then I noticed that actually is a pattern that, like, if I just can push through that 1 or 2 hour period, then I'm going to be awake. And that we actually have these cycles, like all of us, right? Like our
It's
circadian rhythms and
fascinating.
these other rhythms. And so I start thinking, okay, well, where else are these rhythms in my life? And like I start thinking, well, when I have experiences like when I started my lab and the first 95 out of 100 grants I submitted were rejected, literally. And, each time felt like I was being punched in the face. There was like this rhythm of viscerally feeling super negative, but then noticing after 2 or 3 days that the emotions kind of change and they come back and sort of like, whoa, and then I'm receptive. And so it's sort of like, in fact, I'm like hyper receptive. And so it's sort of like being able to tune into those rhythms has been really helpful for me to strive to achieve some major milestones, encounter a lot of setbacks along the way, but be able to be persistent through them because I notice like when I'm experiencing these really negative places because things aren't going well. And then every single thing I've been involved in has had major catastrophes and everything right along the way. But I noticed that failure is never final, right? Like it's never kind of what we were saying before, right? Like it's like that if I can not let myself be defined by this deep negative, visceral, terrible place, and I can sort of feel into and notice that I'm going to be better in a day and even better the next day and even better the next day after that,
Yeah.
that then I can, I just have to respect that there's going to be this phase like that. And then I can stand back up and then, walk forward. So that's a part of it. And then the other part of it too is like to recognize, and this is kind of like becomes a bit of the fun part in all of this, which is when those things happen, what I try to do is I say, after a few days, when I get to this kind of receptive point, I say, okay, who could we bring into this? Like, what other person or being who could we bring into this that would have different ideas or different ways of thinking or different sort of expertise than what we have? And so like, I'm talking in the context of, let's say, projects in the lab where we're trying to solve medical problems. And so all of a sudden we'll be like, okay, we didn't bring in that a surgeon or that type of a doctor or that type of a scientist hasn't been part of our team. Or what if we find somebody and you bring them in and then they say, oh, but have you tried this or have you thought of that? And we're like, no. And all of a sudden we're off to the races again because we have a whole new way of approaching what we were trying to do. You know what I mean? So to me, that's also a big part of it is like is sort of being resourceful in the sense of bringing in fresh energy to like
Yes.
energize whatever the project may be versus to just, so quick to people, often get the question of like, how do you, when you encounter a challenge or a setback, how do you decide whether to keep going or whether to stop?
I was going to
Right.
ask you that question. Yes, yes.
And I would say if we run out of funding, then we may have to stop for a while until we get new funding, right? Like, so that's one of the defining things. But if we still have funding on the project, then what we might do is we might say, it's tempting to just end it and start something new. But I think there's always like these, it's sort of like, we started on this project for a reason, right? And there's a motivation there. And this sort of is like, okay, how do we step back and really think through that there's more possibilities than we're thinking of right at this moment? And could we bring someone in that we'd be really excited to work with that could infuse fresh energy, and maybe we'll, our second or third or fourth or fifth or 10th, 20th, whatever shot on goal, now is the time when we may actually make that big advance. And so it's sort of like, how do we create the constellation of energies and the conditions where we can become excited again? Even if the risks are high, we're at least sort of like putting our best efforts in and bringing sort of the team around the table to give it another shot. And to me, it's just finding ways to keep doing that, because that you increase your chance of making progress if you can keep being persistent and approaching things from a slightly different mindset or perspective.
I love it. It's so much of it is having that like open mindset, to open to other people, open to viewing something differently, open to not giving up and going.
There's some sort of mail delivery, and we have the
That's
attack
okay.
dogs are ready
I know.
to
I have
attack.
one of my own over here. She's the exact same. I want to respect your time, but hopefully I think we have time for one more question, as long as they haven't hurt the mail delivery. So,
I may have to just go pick them up. 1 second.
yeah, yeah, go, absolutely go. Are you muted? Are you there? So, my last question for you would be, you've spoken about turning obstacles into rocket fuel, and I think we're getting an idea of just how you do that. But can you share a specific instance where a personal or professional challenge sort of led to a specific breakthrough in your work?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, well, one example is when I was invited to give a talk at TED Med. So, it's kind of part of TED, and this was several years ago. And I was actually really nervous about it when I was asked, and I said no because I was just really fearful of doing it. I hadn't memorized anything since like elementary school, like the
Right.
speeches that I did, and these things tend to be like 15 to 20 minutes long and pure memorization. And so, but then I realized I was like, wait a moment, they're probably never going to ask me again. So this is it.
Yeah.
I called them back and I was like, okay, I'll do it. And so I prepared. I wrote this script, and I had a lot of help in writing it, various people, and I rented out the biggest auditorium of MIT, the Kresge Auditorium, to practice for like just a few people. And when I practiced for the head of the media office and like my lab, and like I was getting feedback from everybody. My son gave me advice. He's like, this doesn't make sense. And I had to change this video because he found something that I was like, oh my God, you're right. And so, then I get to the Kennedy Center in DC, right, which is where this was being performed. And, they say to me, so I go to the pre-session or whatever, and they say, okay, if you forget your lines, don't run off the stage. They said that
No, they
doesn't.
planted it in your head. They should
Yeah, I
never have said
know.
that.
I
They should
know.
never have said that. Oh no.
Right. And then they said, and if you forget your lines, don't cry. They said that doesn't go well either. They literally said that. They said, so we're like, what are we supposed to do? And they said, well, just smile. Just stand there and smile. Right. And then they said, and by the way, the clicker that you're using, blah, 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 it doesn't go backwards. So if you hit the button twice, you have to yell out, you have to stop your presentation and yell out to the AV person, can you go back a slide? And I was like, oh my God. And then they wanted me to practice like the day before, and they gave me suggestions to change my talk, which I'd already memorized. Like I sort of knew it so well. And I was super stressed, like a
They
lot of
really set you
anxiety.
up for success there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I get up on the stage. There's 5 high definition cameras. It's being live streamed, like around the world. The president of my institution is there in the audience, and I knew it so well that like I could say it, and I was thinking like other things in my mind, right? Because it was just on autopilot, really. And all of a sudden I get to the middle of the talk and I'm like, oh my god, I forgot a line. Like I totally missed a line, and I was like, whoa, that was an important line. Will people have noticed? Like, how important is this? Like, well, is this my mind's just fixated.
No. Yes, I
And
know
I
that very
stopped.
well.
I stopped, right? And I didn't just stop. I actually stopped for 15 seconds, right? Which like is like feels like an eternity, right?
Sure.
So a whole quarter of a minute. And so I'm like all these swear words are coming to my mind, and I'm like, okay, well, I can't run off the stage. I can't cry. All you can do is smile. So I'm just standing there and I'm kind of trying to smile, and I'm holding the clicker, and you can kind of see my other hand. Like I'm trying to like energize, like I'm trying to get this like bolt of lightning to strike me to try to figure out what to say. And then I come up with probably at like second 14 or whatever, I'm like, advance the slide, and I push it forward, and it's a blank slide. And I'm like, what? Like, and I've forgotten why I put a blank slide there. Then I advance again, and I remembered why I had the blank slide, and then I remembered the words for that. And so then I was like, okay, I'll say the words even though I've advanced too far. And so I just started saying the words. And then, by the way, there's like, I've just looked out the window here, and there's this like amazing hawk or eagle that's just starting to fly around, which is awesome. I always love to look at that. But anyhow, so I was able to then continue. So I was able to kind of pick it back up. And then as I'm
Yay.
walking off the stage, the stage coordinator like kind of whispered to me, she's like, oh, we can edit that out for the YouTube version. And so actually what happened then was afterwards there was like a bit of a reception or whatever, and people came up to me and they said, hey, we noticed that you paused, right? And I was thinking to myself, like, my god, I feel like everybody noticed that one. But they're like, it was really great because you were able to continue it. And I'd actually been shamed for early, like in my PhD, when I gave a talk somewhere, somebody like attacked me. They like swore at me, and like they just, it was like a very negative experience, and it
Hmm.
kind of traumatized me and made it difficult for me to give talks from that moment forward.
Understandable.
Yeah, and there was actually like, I remember after that I was supposed to give a departmental talk, and I went to do it, and I stood up at the front, and I was like, I can't do this. I'm sorry. Like I had to cancel it like in the moment. Like people were there. I just couldn't do it because I was just, kind of mobilized. So when this happened at TEDMed, it actually sort of recalibrated everything for me. And I gained this confidence in like, okay, if I stop or something happens, I can find a way to continue.
I love that.
So that changed everything for me. That sort of like catastrophic moment of failure of stopping for 15 seconds in front, the Kennedy Center in DC with the live streaming and all this stuff, to actually repairing or regenerating this pathway in my mind that allowed me to sort of break free from this trauma that I
See,
had.
it was a gift. And it's like, have you ever heard that saying where it's like, you missed the train? Well, was that good or was it bad? I don't know.
Right.
Did you get on this stuff? Was that good or was it bad? I don't know. It doesn't,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's all because doesn't matter. You just, you learn, and it's meant to be, and you grow. And so it sounds like that was quite a gift, which they never feel like it in the moment, do they? Never
No,
feels
no,
like it.
they don't. They don't. But yeah, no, that really was a transformational experience. And it's almost like now, if I think back to all the other kind of setbacks, is very similar. Like the grant rejections that I got, it felt horrible in the moment, but then I was receiving feedback. And if I look at the feedback, the moment I get the grant rejection, I'm like, that idiot, they missed what I had said. They didn't read the grant. They're so wrong. But then if I wait a few days when the emotion sort of subsides and I'm now open for insights, and I'm now sort of focused more on the original goal was to get the grant, I can resubmit it. I look at the feedback and I'm like, actually, they're trying to educate me in how to write better grants. And so now, then I was shifting my mindset from, okay, I'm putting my best foot forward, to actually, this is just version 1.0, and I'm being taught how to bring it to the second version.
You have created a new map of the world. So the way that I see it, we have an experience that happens as a child or our younger selves, and that creates a map, a perception, and how we look and view the world. So it's like a certain pair of glasses that goes on, and we think that this experience means this, or this is how it's going to be. And when you've had a big pattern interrupt, right? It allows you to start to see things differently and have different experiences and to view the world in a different way, which allows you to think and act and do different things, which is incredible. If someone is interested in learning more about you and what you do and your book, what is the best way for them to contact you to learn more?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I have a website. It's my name, jeffkarp.com, Karp with a K. And there you can find information about the book, Lit, Life Ignition Tools, as well as some things that are not in the book. And there's, yeah, a lot of articles and things that I've written and yeah, things like that.
Amazing. I just want to thank you so much for your time and sharing your experiences, your knowledge. It's just incredibly inspiring. And I just really appreciate you coming on and chatting with me. And hopefully the listeners will read your book. It's incredible. Such a great book. So many good tips. So just thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who tuned in and is listening.
Thank you.